I see that mentality living on in Ukrainians to this day. I see a country that is willing to stand up to tyrants, authoritarianism, to dictators, to invaders. I see that clearly. It's to me, it's very much part of the Ukrainian identity. It even manifests in terms of protesting corruption. Ukrainians hit the streets and protested the Zelensky trying to weaken the anti-corruption institutions or taking away the independence of the anti-corruption institutions. I think that mentality manifested in terms of the modern revolutions they've had, Maidan, Orange Revolution. Um, I see that mentality very strong.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 354. And returning after a long hiatus is Josh Friedman. Had him back on almost 2 years ago to talk about what he's seen in Ukraine. Josh is a traveler, and he reports on what he sees all over the world. He's spent a lot of time in Ukraine and been to a lot of different countries. We're going to talk about Ukraine and maybe go on to some other things. By the way, Josh, how many countries have you been to?
I think I've been to 60 something. I think it's in the low 60s. Yeah, I haven't tallied them up recently, but thank you for having me back on. Congrats on making it to more than 350 episodes.
Yeah. I mean, you were last year on number 19, so it's good to have you back. I like bringing early people back on, but I know you're always traveling. It's not. And last time you were coming to me at the Istanbul airport. So, but you're still in Istanbul right now. So that's.
Actually, I played a little hopscotch. I'm in Bulgaria at the moment. I'm across
Bulgaria. Okay.
The border, still within NATO, but now in the EU.
Yeah.
Well, not here for long though. I sometimes I feel like I live at the Istanbul airport.
Yeah. Anyway, so I got to ask you. So you were recently in Ukraine. What have you seen there since since all of this started? What's the general attitude there? I mean, what's the situation there right now?
Well, I haven't been in the country for more than a month. I think it's been like.
Okay, well, yeah, a lot can happen in a month, but still,
6 weeks or so, and yeah, things change or could change pretty quickly. I've been to Ukraine 5 different times now during the war. I've been twice this year for around 3 months total this year in Ukraine. And this year, the glaring difference from previous years has been at least in the cities, I should say. I wasn't at the front, although I was in a couple cities close to the front. But the glaring difference has been the drone bombardment of the cities, primarily the cities that are closer to the front, and Kiev and major cities in the south, the north, the northeast, Kharkiv, Kiev, Odessa. I spent a little time in Sumy. I didn't make it to Dnipro or Zaporizhia, but major cities that are relatively close to the action in Ukraine have been under heavy drone bombardment this year. Russia has pretty much exponentially increased its drone production, and civilians are feeling it in the cities. And that's just been the glaring difference from my experience in Ukraine this year as opposed to previous years during the war.
Yeah, it's definitely so it sounds like to me the war seems less winnable for the Ukrainians than it did a while back.
Well, it almost seems to me that there are two separate wars going on. One, and the drones are playing a major role in both of them. One actually on the battlefield along the line of contact, and the other is the the air war, and
Yeah.
where the civilians in Ukraine are feeling it when you have hundreds of drones and missiles, predominantly drones, but when you have hundreds of drones and missiles coming in on a single night, and it's happening repeatedly over and over again, that pays. I mean, that there's a heavy toll. it's
This is
it's gone from a year ago. It might have been 20 or 30 total on a single night was a lot. Now it's in the hundreds. Russia keeps breaking its record. I think recently it was somewhere around 800 drones and missiles, mostly drones in a single night. I'd have to check what exactly the latest figure was, but it just keeps going up. It goes up from like 200 to 300 to 400 to 500 to 600, 700 beyond in a single night. And the prospects of 1,000 drones coming into Ukraine on a single night are nearing. It's certainly heading in that direction. It could there are estimates and projections that go well beyond that. Go to 2,000 a single night.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple cities. You mentioned Sumy and Kharkiv. Kharkiv seems to be where there's been a lot of actions. I've noticed there's a lot of cities in this that end with IV. I just figured I'd bring up the map here for at least people watching. It might make things easier so they know where things are, because those are just obviously that's where it is. And the Ukrainians obviously don't have these kind of drones that they can send into Russia. It sounds like
they do send drones into
okay.
Russia. Ukraine has been quite successful, especially lately, in hitting oil refineries and energy infrastructure in Russia, everything related to do with oil production. Ukraine's been quite successful in those drone attacks lately, and various drone, like earlier in the year, the spiderweb operation taking out the strategic bombers. Ukraine has had a lot of success in the drone war, but they're not. The level of production is nowhere near Russia. They're not sending 100 drones into Moscow on a single night, for instance.
Yeah, there's not. Well, I don't know if they have. Uh, do the Ukrainians still want to fight, or do they just want to try to figure something out to end the fighting?
To me, it's not so black and white, but increasingly there is a lot of war fatigue in Ukraine. It seems like sentiments are swinging in the direction of wanting to end it, but on what terms?
Yeah,
Because if Russia demands what is effectively seen by Ukrainians as surrender or capitulation, will Ukraine be willing to accept those terms? I don't know. There's just so many people all around the country, whether they're living in frontline cities or far away, who are sick and tired of the war. Although I'd say the people closest to the action are more sick of it. But there's so many people in Ukraine right now who are so tired of it and want it to end. And it can be seen and heard in a lot of different ways. There's frustration about troop rotation. There's frustration about the conscription process. There's serious frustration among civilians, like I was mentioning, about the frequent drone bombardment. In that case, I would say the Kremlin's essentially running an effective terror campaign on the civilian population. There's war fatigue and frustration that manifests in many different ways in Ukrainian society. People are sick of it. They want it to end. But I also don't see a population that's cool with surrender. So is there a way of winding this thing down? I'm not sure what's going to happen.
yeah, it's really that's the question. Is how do you get into it? How do you get out of it? You never got to go to Russia, did you? You don't have any sense for what Russians are thinking about the war, do you? Or
I I have been to Russia, but not during the war, and I have
Okay.
no intention of going during the war. Yes, it would be interesting. I would love to get that perspective, but I find it too risky. I'm not taking the chance of going to Russia anytime soon. Sometimes I'm in contact
Yeah.
with Russians. I don't claim to have as good of a perspective of what the overall sentiments are in Russia the way I do in Ukraine, but it doesn't seem to me like uh, Russians are collectively demanding that the war end.
Okay, that's interesting, but they've got a lot more manpower to fight the war and possibly more money, and it doesn't sound like it's hitting them quite the same way.
Yeah, I don't think it hits them as hard, but if it were to start hitting them hard financially, if it were to start
Yeah,
really impacting their daily lives, then that might change.
true. How much?
No, I don't have so much. I don't have so much faith in Russian society to pressure their government to bring an end to the war. I'm not
Yeah,
expecting that to happen anytime soon.
I'm not expecting that to happen anytime soon either. Do you think there are some sections in Ukraine where they really would rather be part of Russia than be part of Ukraine?
I've spoken to a lot of people about that. Unfortunately, I I never got to go. Maybe I had a few opportunities years ago and I didn't take them, but I've never been to any of the territories that are currently occupied.
Okay.
And from my understanding, it was a little split years ago in Donbass or parts of Donbass about
Yeah.
Russia versus Ukraine, and that might be simplifying it. I'm not denying that there were people in Ukraine who wanted to join Russia, but in terms of what is currently controlled by Ukraine, absolutely not is there an area that wants to join Russia. The war has just hardened anti-Russian sentiments,
Yep.
and whether you're in what is or was a predominantly Russian speaking area or not, there there is no um, there is no pro-Russian area of Ukraine right now, unless potentially we're talking about um, parts of Donbass that were seized 10 plus years ago. But there's been
Yeah.
major population changes there.
Well, what often happens too is, some cases have a lot of,
Or Crimea, I should say, as well.
yeah, Crimea. Yeah. Well, I have a lot. Crimea is a very interesting case because for so long it was just owned by the Turks and other people. It was never, it's never really been Ukrainian, but you could say that maybe it ought to just be its own country. But is it also fair to say that some Russians may have left the more Ukrainian parts of Ukraine because they were because they weren't really didn't feel welcome there either? I mean, say if there were Russians over, if there were Russians over near Lviv or Russians over near Odessa, maybe they've left Ukraine as well. Has that happened? Have you seen the migrations of Russians back to Russia?
I think it's really oversimplifying it to just say that there were Russians in certain areas and did they leave or not. I actually got into this a bit in an interview that I did with a Ukrainian student journalist in Odessa a few months back. There's a lot of question about how do you define ethnicity.
Yeah.
So yes, someone may be Ukrainian nationality, but their first language is Russian. Does that make them Russian? I wouldn't say so, but maybe their parents not only spoke Russian, but identified Russian, or even taken a step further, it might have said in their Soviet passports that they're of Russian ethnicity. So there's a lot of complexity to it. But taking Odessa for example, I've spent a lot of time in Odessa over the past decade, and Odessa was a Russian-speaking city. It's still the first language of almost everyone there, although things are changing a bit. But I wouldn't say that there was a significant Russian population in Odessa. People there are Ukrainian. They may have some Russian roots, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're ethnically Russian. And them alone speaking the language, which is common in southern, northern, eastern Ukraine, just speaking the language doesn't mean that you're ethnically Russian. I don't have such a good grasp of what the situation was in Donbass, for instance. Lviv, as you mentioned, is a very, very Ukrainian city. It's about as culturally Ukrainian as you can get. However, actually, I was there recently, and surprisingly, I heard some people speaking Russian more than some.
Mm-hmm.
Not most people. It used to, I mean, I guess speaking Russian there is still frowned upon, but I saw the reverse migration of what you're talking about. There are refugees from the east who've moved to the west, and I saw that and heard that in multiple cities in Western Ukraine when I was traveling around Western Ukraine a bit last month, and yeah, I see and sometimes run into refugees there or internally displaced people, and I actually hear them speaking Russian on the street in Western Ukraine, which wasn't something I was expected, but I heard it quite a few times.
Well, I brought up Lviv, and as you might know, Lviv was once called Lemberg, and when it was in Austria-Hungary, and it was the birthplace of Ludwig von Mises. And then after World War One, it was Lvov. I guess it was Lvov. It was just
Lvov is the Russian way of saying Lviv.
Oh, okay, but for when it was part of Poland, it was, you'd look on maps and it would often be LWOW, and then it became Lviv after it got to you. And now that's part of Ukraine. So that's a city that's changed hands a lot, but obviously there's less fighting over on the western part. So maybe that's just where people just go from the east to the west because there's less fighting. It's
yes, once in a while there's an airstrike over there. I guess there's the potential with the drone development and production that it could get to the point where where there's widespread bombardment of the west also. But yes, the west is far safer than the east.
Drone warfare is a relatively new thing. How far do these drones go?
Some of them can go all the way to, I mean, they could go beyond, but they could go all the way to
1,000 miles, 2,000 miles. Or...
I filmed some report a couple months back where I talked about how no one's feeling the drone bombardment in Lviv, for instance. And then, like a few days after that, right as I was leaving the city, there was a drone strike in Lviv. And I would elsewhere in Western Ukraine, I saw some air defense being fired.
Yeah,
it's not common that Western Ukraine is under drone bombardment, but it can happen. The drones can go very far, and Ukraine has been striking very far deep inside Russia.
And what kind of damage generally does a drone do? I mean, does it maybe you send a drone and it takes out one house, or it takes out 10 houses, or?
It depends mostly on whether the drone can make it through the air defense and then detonate, and then where does it detonate and what's the impact. So Ukraine shooting down a lot of those drones. I've seen with my own eyes. I've even filmed a couple times when drones are being shot down. There's still risk. A drone that gets shot down can land on something and cause damage, but there isn't going to be the size of the blast or detonation of a drone that makes it through the air defense and then its payload blows up. That's going to be much more dangerous and potentially deadly than one that gets shot down, though it can all cause a problem.
So
And
that so they just
you can see walking around sometimes. Like I filmed a report in Kharkiv. I was there during a lot of drone bombardment, just
yeah.
over a span of a couple of weeks in Kharkiv. But I filmed one report where I was walking around a neighborhood after a drone strike. It was primarily an apartment building that got hit, but there's a big blast radius, and windows are getting shattered all over the neighborhood. Now, potentially there was another drone or drones that detonated or got shot down. I'm not certain, but in that video, I go to an apartment building where it looked like the direct impact was, or close to a direct impact. And then I walked across the street. In one direction, there was a hospital. Windows were shattered there, and people were boarding up the hospital windows. Then in the other direction, there was another apartment building that was damaged. There was a school nearby that the school wasn't damaged, and there was some like a utility electricity company office. I don't know if that was the target. I don't know what the target was, but with a lot of these attacks, the windows of buildings that are across the street or around the corner might get damaged or shattered.
Yeah, so drones do.
I mean, that applies for missile strikes as well, not just drones.
So drones can do quite a bit of damage. It's an interesting, and of course, a lot of this. It's amazing how much a lot of warfare now is just sort of remote controlled. We don't even really have to send in people there. You just send in the military. Yeah, I have heard maybe these are different kind of drones, but I once read a story about a big bird actually disabling drones. You think they could fight the drones with birds or not? Although
I
you
have
can't
not.
just produce birds out of nowhere, but yeah, it's a
I know there's been some very modern or maybe backward anti-drone combat involving the
yes.
FPV drones and cutting lines near the
Mm-hmm.
front. I haven't seen that with my own eyes, but I've heard about that. I don't know about birds. I don't know about birds fighting drones. You
I
got me
think this
beat
was
on.
some. This was. I think this was in Michigan. I think it might have been some photography drone, but yeah, the drone was lost after a bird attacked. It's a really funny story. But do drones attack other drones, or do they just, or do they or do they shoot down drones other ways? I mean, how do you fight a drone?
From my understanding, that's in development right now. I'm not an expert when it comes to this, but I think Ukraine is, and maybe with help of defense companies and international partners, I think they've been trying to develop ways for drones to combat drones, for drones to serve as the air defense. But I can tell you, I've seen with my own eyes, there are literal gunners,
Yeah.
literal gunners standing in Ukraine trying to shoot down those drones with like machine gun type of things. And I'm sure a lot else. I haven't at the front. Actually, I've interviewed a soldier who was a drone pilot for multiple years. He gave me a bit of a perspective on, I guess, the offensive side of drone warfare, not so much the defensive side. Although maybe I could ask him more about that. But night after night, when I'm in these major cities in the south, north, northeast, I hear and I see red dots in the sky
Yeah.
as the Ukrainian gunners try to shoot down drones time after time after time.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild.
Although they did, I think they've even tried using F-16s.
Yeah.
I think one time a drone took down an F-16 a couple months ago. I know Ukraine's trying to do a lot to shoot down the drones,
Yeah.
and Russia's been adapting to that. So when I was there was some reporting about how Russia was changing tactics and sending the drones flying low to start, but then when they would approach the cities, the drones would get very high up in the sky so that they would aim to be too high for the gunners to shoot down, and then I don't know what the strategy is after that to try to get them to go down and detonate their payload, but I know Russia's been changing up tactics and Ukraine's been trying to adapt to that.
When I often talk to people who are at least maybe in America who may have come from Russia, Ukraine, or even some, or maybe have parents who did, one thing I commonly hear is, I have family on both sides. Is that the case in this war?
Yes, it's
What
very
you've heard?
common, and the war has torn apart a bunch of those families. I have spoken with quite a few people in Ukraine who essentially disown their relatives in Russia.
Oh,
I've
wow.
heard I've heard multiple times how Ukrainians have relatives in Russia, whether they're ethnically Ukrainian or Russian. They've been living in Russia for some
Yeah.
time, and then after the war started, they got their news from Russian television, and they had basically a 180-degree opposite view of what's happening in the war from their Ukrainian relatives. And I've heard quite a few times how Ukrainians have cut off communication with I'm not saying this is the case for everyone. There are many,
Yeah.
yes, there are many families with people living on both sides, but I've heard quite a few times about Ukrainians cutting off communication with their relatives because they basically have the Kremlin viewpoint of the war.
Well, I haven't heard them talking about cutting off. But when they say I have family on both sides, they just say I hate this and I want it to end. They don't want to see the fighting. I mean, you, what do do Ukrainians still talk about the whole, the
The
Holodomor
Holodomor.
and other things that happened in the past, like the Khmelnytsky uprising or things like that? Because uh, there does seem to be, Ukraine does seem to have this history, fighting various conquerors and developing their own identity. I mean, first, really for a long time they were fighting the Poles when Poland was actually a huge country, and then they were fighting the Russians, and then that they just want to be independent. What's the sentiment there?
I see that sentiment way stronger in Western Ukraine than
Yeah,
central, northern, eastern, southeastern, northeastern. Although to some extent, I don't like making these distinctions now because the war has changed so much, and it's it's kind of an oversimplification now to just say there's a Western Ukrainian mentality and an Eastern Ukrainian mentality, but the national identity is visibly strong in the West.
yeah,
I would say now that the national identity is much stronger in the other regions closer to the front, but I don't see people literally wearing it. um, I in in Ternopil, a city in the west. There's a um,
yeah, Ternopil, yeah,
um, what do they have there?
yeah. That's why I brought the map back
Okay,
up.
anyway, like yes, the Holodomor is recognized. I've been in Ukraine on a Holodomor
Yeah,
anniversary. It's definitely recognized. I see I I see that mentality living on in Ukrainians to this day. I see a country that is willing to stand up to tyrants, authoritarianism, to dictators, to invaders. I see that clearly. It's To me, it's very much part of the Ukrainian identity. It even manifests in terms of protesting corruption. Ukrainians hit the streets and protested the Zelensky trying to weaken the anti-corruption institutions. They're taking away the independence of the anti-corruption institutions. I think that mentality manifested in terms of the modern revolutions they've had, Maidan, Orange Revolution. I see that mentality very strong in
Yeah,
Ukrainians. But
those are, yeah. Well,
I
it
was just going
wasn't.
to say, oh, go for it.
I was going to say, maybe there's this attitude, among Ukrainians that, even if we surrender and if we put down our weapons, we'll end up dead, and they might, just that we can't, that we have to either that there is no surrender. Where if we lose, we die no matter what, and the only way we can win is to win. There's no because obviously that happened in 32, 33, and even that living under Russians can result in death anyway.
I totally see that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I see it weakening a little bit right now. I I see the will for victory not as strong 3.5 years in as it was earlier in the war. I'm not I'm not saying I see capitulation on the Ukrainian side. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even see how this is so much of a success on the Russian side. They've been fighting for more than 10 years to take towns and villages, and they're
Yeah.
still struggling to do so. But I see Ukrainian society being worn down a little bit. What
Yeah.
I was going to say before is that in the West, you'll see people frequently in black and red, carrying black and red flags, all kinds of nationalist stuff. In Ternopil, they have this Stepan Bandera statue or monument in the middle of the city that people
Yeah.
take selfies in front of. So in that sense, yeah, culturally there is still definitely a difference between the West and the East, the South, the Northeast. But if anything, maybe I see that this
Yeah.
spirit you talk about of
Yeah.
resisting tyranny, maybe it's may and resisting invasions and oppression. Maybe that spirit is stronger closer to the front. Those are the people who put up with the most.
Possibly. Well, as far as I know from what I hear is they still consider Khmelnytsky a national hero too, and that was and that uprising was back in the 1640s.
I don't know as much about that one.
Well, it was a lot longer. Yeah, Bandera, of course, was he lived from 1909 to 1959 and died in Munich actually, but was the Banderites, and they were just fighting the Russians, and this was because they attempted to. There were some independence movements that arose out of World War II again, and they had to choose to fight with one monster and fought against another monster, and they actually thought that Stalin was the worst monster, so they took the side of Hitler against Stalin. So
I can't say that I'm so sympathetic to them, but
yeah,
that's it's a horrific choice to have to make.
it most definitely is,
and it's kind of representative of what Ukraine has been through over the years. The country is continuously, whether it's even recognized as a country internationally or not, the country is continuously put through these horrific situations and mass murders and literal extinction threats, and they persevere. And to me, it's very impressive.
Yeah. What's the general attitude of Ukrainians toward other countries? I mean, are they? It seems like they've pretty much made peace with Poland, and I don't know what their relations are with Romania. I mean, what do they generally think about Americans over there?
It's a pretty fluid situation. I would say most Ukrainians have positive views toward the US and Americans, but right now there's a lot of frustration with what's going on with the Trump administration's handling of the situation. That's definitely the case, but I wouldn't say that the views of America have swung negative in Ukraine. They have pretty good relations with neighboring countries, but unfortunately they have been souring a bit. The relations with Hungary are pretty bad right now. That's not to say that Ukrainians hate Hungarians. I'm not claiming that, but there's a lot of bizarre stuff going on with Hungary. Even when I was there, it was like, is the Hungarian government drumming up the pretext for an invasion of southeastern Ukraine? And the Slovakian government right now is sympathetic to the Kremlin. So there are some neighbors they don't have the best of relations with at the moment. And yeah, there's some troubled past with Poland, but I think for the most part it's a Kremlin narrative to try to get Ukrainians and Poles fighting one another. And I don't think there's about to be some additional war or front that's going to break out between Ukraine and Poland. To me, that's nonsense. But I was in Poland recently. I did not spend enough time there to fully take in the sentiments, but I remember being in Poland when the war kicked off in 2022, and it seemed like there was widespread, pretty much nationwide support for Ukraine at the time, signs and flags everywhere supporting Ukraine. And I think a lot of that's wearing off in Poland, but that's not to say that Poland is turning on Ukraine.
Yeah. And Poland has probably taken in the most Ukrainians. I mean, how many Ukrainians would you say have left Ukraine since this all started?
Oh, I don't have the numbers on me. I think I heard at some point it could have been 5 to 10 million.
No, geez.
I don't have the numbers on me.
But that's out of a country with about 40 million. That's a lot of people.
And a declining population even before the war. I would need to check that though. Maybe we could fact check that.
Well, and unfortunately, for better or for worse, that's the trend everywhere in Europe. I mean, there is not a single country that comes even close now to producing enough kids to maintain the population. All these countries are going to have less people in 50 years unless something changes. I did hear, since I've covered Javier Milei a lot, I can tell you that Orban was at Milei's inauguration and Zelensky was at Milei's inauguration, and they apparently almost got into a fight. I mean,
I could believe that.
Yeah. And wouldn't that be wild, And instead of having a war, we can just have these two guys fight each other. I mean, it would be so much easier for us all,
I'm not so sure that's going to solve anything, but many times you'll hear people who are fed up with the entire geopolitical situation in the world right now saying, why don't we just have some world leaders have a duel or duke it out?
Yeah.
AI is saying, and I don't know how trustworthy this is, AI is saying approximately 5.7 million refugees have left Ukraine since the start of the war.
I don't know if you ever really can know until you actually sit down and take a census, but
for instance,
it's hard to take any census during a war.
I'm in Bulgaria right now, and Ukrainians flooded into Bulgaria early in the war, and there are probably a bunch of Ukrainian men here who shouldn't be here by law. There are a lot of Ukrainian men who got out at the beginning of the war or shortly before the war started. I don't know if they're all accounted for.
Mm-hmm.
It's a rough situation.
Well, that's the one thing, and
there are also a lot of Ukrainian men. It's not a joking matter. There are a lot of Ukrainian men literally hiding in their houses at times. But there's no proper census going on, so I don't.
Well, this is generally something I've heard too, though, is that I certainly want to see independent people who want to be independent, but the sentiment among a lot of people here is that Zelensky is just as corrupt as Putin is. What do Ukrainians think about Zelensky personally? I mean,
I think Ukrainians, as we alluded to a bit earlier, are very skeptical of authority.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
in that sense, I think they are very distinct culturally and politically from Russians.
Yeah.
So I think that Ukrainians, as it was evidenced recently with the protests, even in dark times, are willing to pressure their government to be less corrupt and to better serve the interests of the people as they see it. I do hear a lot of people complaining about corruption, but I've done interviews like I interviewed a retired, what was his position, a major in the military who was
Yeah.
also a local a local politician in the Ternopil region, and he was giving me a pretty detailed argument as to why he does not see a lot of corruption in the military sphere in Ukraine. Ukraine has had a reputation for being a corrupt country for a long time.
Yeah.
I just think, unlike a lot of other corrupt countries, Ukrainians as a whole, Ukrainians as a population want to do something about it and continuously trying to do something about it. And it doesn't seem to me like they view Zelensky as a significantly more corrupt leader than past leaders, or
Mhm.
even I don't I, I don't really hear the sentiment much in Ukraine that Zelensky is more corrupt than Poroshenko and more corrupt than um, several of the presidents of the past, Yanukovych, Yushchenko, etc. But yeah, there's just I notice general complaints and frustration about corruption in Ukraine, but I heard that all pre 2022 invasion. I don't
Okay.
I don't think that the population, I don't think that Ukrainians right now view the country as much more corrupt than it was at the start of the war. That's at
Yes,
least
sir.
that's not the sentiment I get from
Mhm.
speaking with people there. And I've heard
Mhm.
I've heard people I've heard people make arguments on both sides, but I do see a continuous push within Ukrainian society, and during the war it's complicated to do it, but I see a continuous push within Ukrainian society to battle corruption. And in that way they're Ukrainians are very distinct from Russians. Because the anti-corruption movement in Russia has basically been sidelined, if not killed.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Josh. I mean, I'm not sympathetic to the Russian. I mean, Rudyard Lynch recently pointed out there was a poll of the Russia's greatest heroes, and number one in the poll was Stalin. Number two was Ivan the Terrible, and number three was Peter the Great. And I'm just thinking, okay, if you have a culture, I don't think the Russians want war, but unfortunately, war is the inevitable result when you constantly worship sociopaths and give them lots of authority. And as long as you give sociopaths authority, you're going to have war. So and I don't know if you've examined the Russian attitude toward this war, but as you pointed out, they don't seem to care. They don't seem to care that they've done a lot of horrible things to a lot of people over the years.
I'm not in such close contact with many Russians this day, though I do run into Russians a lot in places that I frequent. Um, and over the years, I've befriended Russians in various places, and I did visit Russia once. Uh, at the beginning of the war, the very beginning, the first day, I saw a bunch of people posting on social media, uh, "Нет войне," no to war, and
Yeah.
since then, like nothing. There were some protests in Moscow. Was it even Moscow? Definitely in St. Petersburg at the very beginning of the war, and the militarized police came in and swooped up the protesters, threw them in vans. Quickly, the law was passed about, I believe it's an actual law about
Yeah.
punishment for like 10 years in prison for any criticism of the Russian military or the so-called special military operation. And almost overnight, the anti-war movement in Russia was over.
Yeah, they're almost out, and a lot of them have gotten out of Russia, fortunately. But you know, I mean, being a libertarian, I hang with libertarian circles, so I don't really know what the typical Russian thinks. It's and protesters. I mean, there's always a handful of anti-war voices in every war, but most of the time they're irrelevant.
The anti-war voices are pretty much irrelevant in Russian society. I'm not saying they don't exist, but they've been sidelined, marginalized, if not completely eradicated from the country. They may be fairly loud and speaking in Russia from outside of Russia. There are a lot of Russians with big followings or formerly prominent Russians, like maybe Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who once had some influence and challenged Putin within Russia, but and I'm not saying he's the leading voice of the opposition, but he's not in Russia anymore. Like these Russians who are speaking out against the war are predominantly outside of the country. If anything, the criticism of the war effort within Russia is coming from the side of Putin isn't going hard enough, isn't fighting well enough or strong enough in Ukraine. But even those voices get marginalized. Like I'm forgetting the what's the name of the former FSB officer who helped instigate what was essentially the initial invasion of Donbass in 2014. He had been very critical of Putin in his writings, but from the perspective that he was more pro-war than Putin, and he got thrown in jail. He's in jail. I'm forgetting his name. Strelkov or something.
Yeah.
Actually, he had two names. Yeah, Igor Gherkin, who also goes by Strelkov. So if you criticize the war from an anti-war perspective in Russia, your likely destination is jail. If you criticize the war from a pro-war perspective in Russia, jail or dead. Like who else? What's
I did. Yeah, that was a good answer. Yeah. So, what do Ukrainians think about the European Union in general? Did they want to be part of the EU, or would they just, or they don't want to be part of the EU?
I think at this point there's pretty wide support for joining the EU in Ukraine. Yeah.
What do you think motivates that?
I don't know how optimistic Ukrainians are about it, but in general, they want to be part of what they call as Europe. They view that there are stronger economic opportunities if they're more integrated with Europe. In recent years, women at least have had the opportunity to travel and live in European countries and take advantage of that and work in places with higher wages. They just it's very common sentiment all throughout the region where most people view leaving Russia and joining the West as something that will raise their standard of living and help their pocketbook and improve the quality of their life. I wouldn't say that it's something particularly unique to Ukraine, but I see it in Ukrainians. Well, at this point, Russia's waging war on them, so they've pretty much lost interest in even dating back to the Maidan, it was very clear that Ukrainians did not want to be more economically integrated with Russia. They wanted to be more economically integrated with
Yeah.
Europe, if not outright joining the EU. But the simple answer to that, I'd say, is they just view it as presenting them more opportunity and a way to raise their standard of living.
Well, that's a question too. Whether they want because joining the EU can be a double-edged sword. You've mentioned the Maidan a couple times. What exactly was the Maidan? I'm not sure if everybody out there would know what it is or was.
Viktor Yanukovych was president at the time, and he had agreed to he had previously agreed or signaled that he would sign the EU association agreement, which was basically like a economic deal or free trade deal with the EU, and it's largely viewed as a step toward joining the EU or a step toward EU integration. And then he backed out of it. The allegations were that he was essentially offered like, what was it, $3 billion of investment from the Kremlin, and he backed out of it and moved toward Ukrainian integration in what was that Russian thing called? The Eurasian Economic Union, I believe.
They've had several. Russia has several groups. I mean, like there's yeah.
Anyway, that sparked large protests, and the protests went on for months around early 2014. They started late 2013. And a lot of people have a lot of different views on it. A lot of people in libertarian circles, for instance, in the West, view it as a coup. I certainly do not. But yes, there was, yes, the U.S. government was supporting the protests in some ways. Yes, there was money. There was money given. There was emotional support literally on the ground by people like John McCain. Eventually they turned violent. There's a lot of finger pointing about who fired shots from the trade. I think, was it the trade union building? I think it was the trade union building next to the Maidan. That building's been rebuilt. And eventually, from the Ukrainian perspective, the revolution, they now call it the Revolution of Dignity, but I more commonly hear it as Maidan Revolution. Eventually it succeeded, or just the Maidan, and Yanukovych fled to Russia, and eventually that led to new elections and Poroshenko winning and coming to power. And Maidan is seen in Ukraine as a hugely historic moment, and a lot of people point to that as what triggered Putin to start seizing land and invading. And a lot of people have a lot of different views on it.
Yeah, I brought up this little diagram that can show these various groups. I mean, there's the Union State, which is Russia and Belarus, and then there's the Eurasian Economic Union, which also includes Armenia, Kazakhstan, and I don't know what that red one is. And then there's the CSTO and
Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah, and then there's the CSTO.
I would say, in short, all of the Russian-led international organizations in the region are crumbling now.
Okay.
Because
yeah.
Militarily, the Armenians and the Azerbaijanis fought each other, yet managed to conclude that Russia's no good for both of them, at least right now. So they, Azerbaijan had previously left the CSTO. The CSTO is the Collective Security Treaty.
Yeah. What's that other country in the CSTO that's on the top there? I can't
That's Kyrgyzstan, I believe. Kyrgyzstan,
Kyrgyzstan.
Kazakhstan, Armenia. But
Kazakhstan is kind of the blue flag with the yellow circle. I know that much. But
Kazakhstan is the blue one with the yellow.
Yeah, but the other two might be
Kyrgyzstan
others.
is the red one. But at this point, it's basically irrelevant because Kazakhstan is concerned about potentially being invaded by Russia, and there were Russian forces that swooped in. I think it was shortly before the 2022 invasion to quell an uprising there. I literally, with my own eyes, saw Russian soldiers in Armenia during the Karabakh War in 2020, standing there and doing nothing as there were attacks on Armenia proper. It's kind of a tangent, but at that point I realized that the CSTO was basically meaningless. The idea that it was some Russian equivalent of NATO was a joke, because the short of it was when Armenia and Azerbaijan were fighting over Karabakh, Russia had said, if the fighting is in Karabakh, that's to kind of simplify it. That's essentially no man's land. That's not Armenia. We have no responsibility to protect Armenia when there are attacks in Karabakh. But I filmed equipment that was destroyed in Armenia proper. I went to a village that got struck in Armenia proper and walked around there filming. There were a handful of civilians killed in Armenia proper during that 2020 war. So that would essentially trigger the CSTO equivalent of a NATO Article 5 response.
Okay, yeah.
And it didn't. Russian troops were just at bases doing nothing, as there were people under fire in Armenia proper. Russia did not defend its ally Armenia. And then Azerbaijan literally shot down a helicopter in Armenia at the end of that. I was really close to that when it happened. I couldn't see it though, but Russia basically didn't respond to that militarily. So the CSTO is basically a joke. Armenia since sought help from France and the West and has tried to mend its relations with Turkey. What's not evident in this chart is that Turkey is essentially overtaken Russia as the strongest player in the region.
Yeah, the Caucasus region.
The Caucasus and part of Central Asia.
Yeah. Okay, I looked up.
I mean, that's not factoring in what's happening economically and geopolitically with Chinese influence and whatnot, and now Trump's trying to do some things in the region. But Turkey's military influence and political influence has expanded, and Russia's has retracted. And Kazakhstan does not have a favorable view of Russia now. Armenia certainly does not have a favorable view of Russia now. Azerbaijan really does not have a favorable view of Russia right now. So most of these supranational organizations that Russia had been building as alternatives to the Western supranational organizations like the EU and NATO are falling apart or basically non-existent.
Okay, I was just going to go over this. The Eurasian Economic Union, that other country is Kyrgyzstan. The country that's in the CSTO, that's Tajikistan. So I don't know what this country is over here, but they're not in anything.
Turkmenistan?
And then what? Maybe
that is Turkmenistan. That's Turkmenistan, the one that's not in anything.
And from what I hear, also you haven't been there, but Turkmenistan is basically almost as bad as North Korea. It's really that closed off. But
if by bad you mean closed off, yes. Turkmenistan,
closed off, oppressive. Definitely, I've heard you have to be part of a tour group to go visit there. But I would say don't go visit there anyway. Now, if you get to this bigger diagram in the Commonwealth of Independent States, I see Moldova. I see Azerbaijan. I'm not sure what this blue, white, green flag is. That's probably another one of the stans, I suppose. Well, but then you go over here, some like over here in the top left, that's Georgia, Sakartvelo, that's Ukraine, that's Azerbaijan. So yeah, and then I don't know why it's here, but down here you have the Baltic Assembly, and yeah, I'll have to. Must be the
that's Uzbekistan. I should have.
Uzbekistan. Yeah, that's the one stan we didn't get. Yeah, Uzbekistan, and then down here, this Community for Democracy and Human Rights and Nations. Those are some countries that don't really officially exist in a lot of, as far as a lot of people are concerned. Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and I don't know who the other one is, but
Transnistria. I've been to Transnistria. I've never been to South Ossetia and Abkhazia.
Yeah, have you been to Tbilisi or any place like that? Or
yeah, I've been to Tbilisi. I've been to Georgia.
What was the last time you were in Tbilisi? What have you seen there?
Not recently. I'd like to go back sometime soon. They've had a lot of protests, and there's a major battle among Georgians over Russian influence in the country.
Oh yeah.
The geopolitical direction of the country has somewhat flipped over the past decade. And from my understanding, it's a bit of an awkward situation where it seems like most of the population still wants to join the West, but the government is almost fully in line with the Kremlin.
Yeah, they've definitely been protesting. There's a lot of I was there 3 years ago, and I just really loved the place, and they were all so pro-Western, and just and it's the Caucasus is such a wild region. I mean, you still have two countries there that use their own alphabet, and nobody else uses that alphabet. It's so wild. I mean, the Armenians have their alphabet, and they have their own alphabet in Tbilisi, and it's just. I hope those countries can stay unique, but it's very hard for those little countries to make it on their own. They've got to form these alliances and work with somebody.
Armenia in particular, it's drawn a lot of comparisons with Israel. I don't really want to go there, but a lot of Armenians view themselves as being cursed with their geography and surrounded by enemies, and frequently under threat of extinction. And I've not been to Armenia since 2020 when the war was going on. There wasn't a very pleasant resolution to that. I was not there when Azerbaijan fully took back or fully took over, however you want to refer to it. Nagorno-Karabakh, all those ethnic Armenians flooded out of there and into Armenia proper. I was not there for that, but I was there during the war in 2020. Yeah. So I'm not so in touch with all of the sentiments there right now, but I have seen from a distance as Armenia, at least led by Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, trying to mend relations with Turkey and Azerbaijan seemingly out of necessity. But I'm not certain how the Armenian population as a whole views it right now, but Pashinyan went from literally being at war with Azerbaijan and Aliyev, the leader, and pretty much de facto at war with Turkey and Erdogan, to suddenly doing deals with them, shaking hands, showing up in Istanbul, showing up at the White House with Pashinyan, with Aliyev. So that situation's changed, but go back to the point from before, Russia's lost their influence there, and not very happy that Turkey and the US are exerting themselves there in the Caucasus.
I didn't think that much about that war, but after going to Armenia for just a couple of days and having an absolutely positively wonderful Airbnb host, I fell in love with the country, and just seeing some of those really old monasteries and monuments. I mean, just it's so powerful when you're in it. Really, I just realized This was the first country, whether or not you agree with the country declaring an official religion, this was the first official Christian country in the world. And what really shocks me is so many Christians around the world don't seem to care what's happening there.
Armenia is truly unique from a heritage standpoint. Yeah, and it was sad to see in 2020, and I guess it was even worse when Azerbaijan fully took over Karabakh. It was even worse for Armenians, I would think. But it was very sad to see as they essentially cried out for help from Christian and democratic countries and got pretty much nothing.
It almost seems like a parallel to when all the countries in around Poland decided, well, we're just going to slowly take over Poland and divide it up, and that's what happened. It just and Armenia's because I hear history, that Armenia was much larger and it actually took a lot of parts of Turkey that don't really that don't have Armenians.
I've been to those parts. I shot a video once in Van, Turkey. Van's a region in southeastern Turkey, and there's an island there called Akdamir Island with a historic old Armenian church that I forget how old, like 1,000 years old.
Is that VONN?
VAN, like van. There's a lot of there's a lot of Armenian heritage in the region, and it's a very dicey subject because of how Armenians ended up getting kicked out of that region.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. I think they also got kicked out of is it Nakachev, that other western section of Azerbaijan.
Nakhchivan, but what I'm getting at, what I'm alluding to, is the Armenian genocide, and what happened in what's now southeastern Turkey.
But they definitely had a coast. They had a coastline too, as far as what I've heard too, which they don't anymore. Yeah,
ooh, my geography's weak, which it shouldn't be, but
they might have been on the Black. That they might have been on the Black Sea, of course, because Armenia is completely
Armenia stretched all the way to the Black Sea.
That's what I've seen on older maps. I mean, that there was definitely a much larger Armenia, but that does bring me up, since you've been living in Turkey. What's been going on with Turkey?
I haven't so much been living in Turkey as I've been coming and going a lot.
Okay, yeah.
It's been my home base on and off.
Yeah.
There's always stuff going on in Turkey. Domestic politics got a little intense there earlier this year when Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu was thrown in jail, and there were protests. Yeah. I wasn't there at the time. Maybe it was a good thing I wasn't there at the time. I don't know. But in terms of Turkish domestic politics, that's a really uncertain situation, because is the Erdogan era going to end? How might it end? Is İmamoğlu going to come out of jail like Erdogan once did and rise to high office? I don't know, but I can say that internationally speaking, Turkey's really been flexing its muscles. We already got into that somewhat, but domestically, people aren't happy there. It's maybe an oversimplification, but there's been so much inflation in Turkey over the past several years. A lot of people are struggling. So Erdogan's a political wizard, and how he manages to one way or another stay in office and have somewhat of a cult-like following and continuously maintain a pretty high level of support from one side of Turkish society.
Yeah.
But people in general are struggling financially in Turkey.
Did you ever go to this place, Josh? I mean, there's a town in Turkey called Batman.
I saw you smirking. I didn't know what it was about.
Yeah. So
It's
obviously
possible.
it's not a reference to Batman, but I just inevitably had to. That is kind of funny
It's
though.
it's
Batman turkey.
Batman. It's Batman.
Batman,
And
yes, it's
I was there
Batman, yes.
I was there very briefly once. It's near. There's so many historic sites in that region.
Oh gosh, I can imagine. Yes.
It's near Mount Nemrut, and I think I spent one night in Batman after. Might
Yeah.
have flown out of Batman another time also. I think I spent one night in Batman after visiting Mount Nemrut.
I just thought people would. A lot of people kind of get a kick out of that. I could, yeah, I figured
I
it's
didn't know. I didn't know what your smirk was about.
yeah, I just thought that. Well, there's a town in North Carolina called Bat Cave, believe it or not. But yeah. So anyway, but is it Western Turkey though is a lot more like Europe, and Eastern Turkey is a lot more like a lot more like well the Arab world, right?
Not exactly. So, if I were to simplify things, I would say coastal Turkey, predominantly the Turkish Riviera, the Aegean coast, and the Mediterranean coast of Turkey is more liberal, more Western and European in mindset. And then uh, the east, the southeast, the center of the country, Istanbul's very split.
Yeah.
Ankara's kind of a different place altogether. But it gets a little confusing because of all the ethnic dimensions. So the southeast is very Middle Eastern, but the southeast is also very Kurdish.
Yeah.
So it's not so much, there are Arabs living in the southeast too, but it's not so much that the southeast is more Arab, and Turks in general do not like being referred to as Arabs. They're not Arab. Their language is not Arabic. Turkish is its own family.
They use the Roman alphabet. Yes.
They switched to that 100 years ago, or exactly when, sometime around then. Yeah, so Turks do not like being referred to as Arabs. But yes, the southeast of Turkey feels very Middle Eastern. In some ways, it does feel like Arab countries, but it's largely Kurdish and Turkish. There's very dense Kurdish populations there.
Yeah, there's a
And
Kurdish population.
some of the cities are kind of split. Istanbul's a good example, and kind of split in mentality and culturally.
Mm-hmm.
But Izmir, Antalya, those are coastal cities. Those are more liberal, more, dare I say, European cities. Even though they're not geographically in Europe. In fact, none of this Riviera, none of this Turkish coastline that I'm talking about is geographically in Europe. It's all geographically in Asia.
I mean, well, I can imagine. I mean, Istanbul has probably always been a very cosmopolitan city. I can just imagine with having the Dardanelles there and just being the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, and just, I mean,
it's the Bosphorus there, not Dardanelles,
yeah,
but Dardanelles
the Bosphorus. Yeah, well, the little strait that goes from the Black Sea to the Aegean Sea, which is
the Bosphorus.
The Bosphorus. Yeah, there's just been. I mean, there's just so much history there. I mean. And obviously you'd have a crossroads of just where all kinds of people would be going in and out of there. I mean, the Russians have tried to take it, ancient Greece. I mean, so is Turkey's actually cooling things off with Armenia. That's pretty wild to hear. I mean,
very much so. It's totally, now I can't say what Armenians, I could ask some friends of mine, I probably should. I can't say what Armenians think about this, like whether this has been done out of necessity or whether people are furious with Pashinyan. I'm sure there's some people furious with Pashinyan, because I remember back in 2020, there are a bunch of people even then viewed, I'm not saying it's most of society, but there are a lot of people there who viewed him as essentially a traitor for capitulating in the war.
I've had a couple Armenians on here, so I can always ask them. But yeah,
Have you had
unfortunately not me.
have you had Rafi Elliott on?
Rafi Elliott, no.
Have him
I've
on.
had
Ask him, not me.
I've had Gore Badalayan on, who is the guy who's leading the Ayn Rand Center Armenia, and he is by far and what's amazing, what he's doing that's truly remarkable. I mean, he has the Ayn Rand Center Armenia, and every time he puts up a picture of some event he always has more women than men, and I'm just like, what are you doing over there? Tell us what you're doing.
I didn't know that, but
Yeah, and not to mention,
I know a few libertarian Armenians,
and
but
not, and not,
I see that a lot in Central and to some extent Eastern Europe, where certain libertarian events will get major turnout from ladies.
It was that way. It was that way in Tbilisi too. We might have had. I think we might have been about 50-50. You go to an American libertarian event, it's almost all. I mean, it's 75% male or at least 80% male. So I was just amazed at what they're doing, and not to mention, I think, and some of the women in the Caucasus region and just Armenian women are absolutely positively beautiful. It's just.
I don't want to throw shade.
Yeah.
Armenia is usually not the first country in the region I hear when people are describing the beauty of.
Yeah, last time I was in LA, I tried to go into their area. I didn't really notice much, but they have a very large Armenian area there. Little Armenia they call it. So it was
huge. The Armenian population in the LA area, and they're really concentrated around Glendale and Pasadena. The Armenian population in the LA area is far and away the largest diaspora population. And
yeah, I wonder why they went to LA.
I think it's actually, I should know the answer to that. I don't. I grew up in LA, so
yeah. Well, you don't hear that.
Sorry.
LA is not as old. You hear about these kind of places in New York or cities where they would get immigrants, but they likely went from the east to the west, but maybe they came the other way too. I mean, maybe they came across the Pacific. Yeah. So, did you get? You're in Bulgaria and so what's the sentiment in the Balkans right now? I mean, toward Ukraine and all that stuff. What's going on with Bulgaria? I've never had a Bulgarian on here, so
I could introduce you to some Bulgarians. I used to live in Bulgaria.
Yeah. You seem to like it for a while. I mean, the Bulgarians use the Cyrillic alphabet just like the Ukrainians and the Serbs. So.
Yeah, the Bulgarian one is phonetic though. So
yeah,
I'm not saying learning Bulgarian is easy. I struggled with it, but everything, once you learn how to read Cyrillic, everything's phonetic. So it's easy to pronounce words in Bulgarian if you can read the alphabet.
That's pretty well. So yeah. So what is the sentiment there right now? I mean, I think most of the Balkans really aren't. Most of the Balkan countries, I don't think, really are that positive toward the Russians, right? I mean, maybe the Serbs but after being,
it's a little complex with Bulgarians and Serbs, but outside of Bulgarians and Serbs, granted, there's some little pockets, but for the most part, the sentiments toward Russia are very negative. If you're talking about Bosnian Muslims, negative. Albanians, negative.
Romanians.
Well, if we want to include Romanians, it's getting a little odd what's been happening in Romania this year. But at least in the past,
I had a guy to talk about the election on. Yeah, so the election that was canceled. Yeah.
In the past, I would say that the sentiments in Romania were very negative toward Russia.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe they're changing a bit now. I have not spent much time in Romania recently. I was briefly in Romania a year ago. I have been to Romania a bunch of times. Actually, I have Romanian roots.
Mm-hmm.
But in the past, the sentiments toward Russia were very negative in Romania. Maybe it's swinging a little bit. In Bulgaria, there are or at least there were many Bulgarians who were nostalgic for some, even nostalgic for communism.
Oh my
uh,
goodness.
but there were a lot of Bulgarians
Mhm.
who viewed Russia as a brotherly country that liberated or helped liberate Bulgaria from Ottoman rule.
Yeah.
And there used to be a lot of Bulgarians with quite favorable views toward Russia. When I was living here, I did not see that at all
Mhm.
among the younger generation or younger generations. And increasingly, the Russian language, well, there's some
Mhm.
distinctions. Like the older Bulgarians, they learned Russian. The younger
Yeah.
Bulgarians, for the most part, have not learned Russian, but there's a lot of Russian spoken on the coast in Bulgaria, predominantly in the summer, because the coast is full of Russians and Ukrainians, lots of Russian tourists.
Yeah.
Uh, Bulgarians tend to have uh, much more Western orientation. I think it's I think it's the case both with Bulgarians and Serbs. I just don't see them in any kind of significant numbers traveling to Russia, studying in
Yeah.
Russia, working in Russia, having any
Oh yeah.
real ties to Russia
Yeah.
other than in some political circles they drum up a bunch of supposed support for Russia. But I've
Mhm.
at this point I don't see I don't see there being a single country in
Mhm.
the Balkans that's pro-Russian.
Yeah. Is
And
it?
I think even at the political level, at the governmental level, the policies in Serbia have shifted a lot. But I know for years, I haven't been there recently. I'd like to do another Western Balkan trip soon, but I know for years that the pro Vucic media drum up a bunch of support or like tabloid material promoting Putin and promoting Vucic,
Yeah.
but I don't think that's really reflected in the mentality of most Serbs, nor the direction of the country
Yeah.
at this point. But I've not been in Serbia recently.
Is it true though that one thing I've heard is that after Russia helped liberate these countries from the Turks, is that Russia helped them, at least Russia helped them rebuild their Orthodox churches in some of these countries because, like Bulgaria, Serbs, uh, because the countries that use the Cyrillic alphabet are also mostly Orthodox. Is that true or not?
Well, there's a complexity to all of this.
Yeah.
In Bulgaria, the view is that the Cyrillic alphabet came from Bulgaria. The the largest, most famous church, Orthodox church in the center of Sofia, the capital of Bulgaria. It's called Nevsky, Alexander Nevsky. I think, I don't remember if
Oh, Nevsky's I believe,
the
a major
Russians,
hero
yeah,
in Russia. Yes.
it's essentially named after a Russian hero to honor Russians for liberating Bulgaria
Yes.
from the Turks, as you say. There's also there's a Russian Orthodox church right down the street from there. There have been a lot of ties over the years between the Russian and Bulgarian churches. I think a lot of people critical of Russia are very skeptical of those ties. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's influence. Like there's Russian influence in the Orthodox community as a whole, but my
Yeah.
impression is that in recent years that's been declining
Yeah.
because of the general skepticism toward Russia and Russian imperialism in countries in the region.
Oh yeah, I know. There's also, I've heard, for example, that Zelensky's actually been oppressing the churches in Ukraine. Is that true too, or?
I don't view it as that. at all. Years ago, before the full-scale invasion started, I interviewed someone high up in the Kiev Patriarchate of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. It gets very complicated, but there was a Russian Patriarchate and a Kiev Patriarchate of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and the Russian one was essentially controlled by the Kremlin, and the viewpoint of the Ukrainians was that there were Russian assets embedded throughout the Russian controlled Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and they were siding with Russia, even going back to the initial invasion of Donbass and what was happening dating back to 2014, and essentially calling for Ukrainians to support a Russian invasion of Ukraine. So Ukraine took steps for a long time to root out the Moscow controlled Ukrainian Orthodox Church and to try to get people to switch over to the Kiev Patriarchate, the Ukrainian controlled Ukrainian Church. I think there's a lot of misinformation, particularly in the US, spread about the so-called oppression of Christians in Ukraine and Zelensky supposedly shutting down churches and arresting all these Christian figures. Obviously, there's nuance to it, but I generally view the Moscow Patriarchate that existed in Ukraine as what's that term? Like
A Trojan horse.
Trojan horse, the fourth column. Yes.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, I mean, if something really is a Trojan horse, it's the lesson learned from this entire show has been is that everything is a lot more complicated than it might seem at first glance. I guess, yeah, but this has certainly been an informative discussion too.
I hope my connection held up enough.
Yeah, it has been. I don't. Do you have anything else you want to talk about before we go? I don't think there's that much left. You haven't been to Israel by chance, have you, or not?
I've been to Israel quite a few times, but I've not
recently.
I have not been recently, and I'm Jewish, and I have family in Israel, and what limited reporting or content I produce about Israel, I try to be very clear that I have a dog in the fight, and I, for the most part, avoid doing reporting on Israel because of that. I'm in touch with family, sometimes friends there, but I don't really have great insights.
Yeah.
Share about what's been transpiring there over the past couple of years, though I do hear things from people there quite a bit.
Yeah, I was meaning, of course, since 7 October 2 years ago. But yeah, there's a lot of war. It keeps the journalists busy, doesn't it? What would you do without war? There's nothing to cover. That's the history of the world. Really, the history of the world is just really the history of war.
It's sad to say, but it gives me something to cover. It gives me a whole lot of adrenaline. It keeps my blood pumping and flowing. Maybe it's not the safest or smartest thing to do to go in and out of war zones, but for one reason or another, I really care about it, and I'd say, a passion of mine.
Yeah, where was the least safe place you feel like you've been to? Just
in my reporting?
Yeah.
Potentially my hometown or somewhere on the West Coast as I was covering Black Lives Matter protests 5 years ago.
Oh yeah, you put up some interesting videos.
When I'm in Ukraine, I don't think that the Russians are hunting me. Maybe if I go into Kherson again, like I tried to go recently, maybe I really need to watch my back because there's been a bit of a human hunting expedition or exposition there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I felt like I was being targeted, not to be killed, but I felt like I was being targeted a fair amount when I was
Well,
covering those Black Lives Matter protests. But I'd say being in Kharkiv during drone bombardment is quite scary, quite nerve-wracking.
my driver took me when we actually drove from he actually drove me from Yerevan to Tbilisi, and we actually went by Lake Savan, and then we actually went by a section where it actually gets very close to the border with Azerbaijan, but we were up north, so that was a little safer. But
I heard
saw a little bit of military around. Yeah.
I heard and could essentially see shelling taking place there, cross-border Armenian Azerbaijan back in 2020, and
Yeah.
I guess other than that part, there was a nice drive to and from Yerevan along Lake Sevan.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was going north though. North toward Tbilisi. It wasn't. I don't know if there was much fighting up there, but Google Maps. The guy knew the area, so he seemed to think it was safe. So anyway, where can we find you out there? You've got a YouTube channel, so
You can find me at youtube.com/@nomadjournalist, or just type in Josh Friedman into YouTube, or
yes.
on Twitter or X, however you refer to it, as Free Man Reporter.
Yes. Okay, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, go buy my novel, Escape from the Village. Check out my Substack. People are giving me money to buy me a coffee. Thank you, Josh Friedman. It's great to have you back. I'm Chris Baker. We're out. Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.